Same camera, same VM, one difference, a $50 GPU. That's GPU Passthrough. And if you're running Frigate, local AI, or anything with CUDA inside a Proxmox VM, this video is going to save you a weekend. By default, when you create a Proxmox VM, it gets emulated graphics. That's fine for a web server or a file share that doesn't really need a GPU. But the moment you try and do anything that needs actual graphics processing, things slow to a crawl. And here's why I think every home lab should consider this. A cloud GPU instance costs from 50 cents to $3 an hour. A used NVIDIA Quadra P400 can be found used for 50 bucks. If you're running something 24/7, like Frigate watching your cameras, the card pays for itself in a week. I'm going to walk you through the entire setup from start to finish on my actual cluster. But more importantly, I'm going to show you where things go wrong, because that's where a lot of other tutorials leave you hanging. Before we touch any config files, we're going to make sure your hardware can actually do this. This is where most tutorials fail you. They jump straight into editing files, and then you spend an hour configuring only to find out that your hardware doesn't actually support pass-through. Two things have to be true. First, your CPU and motherboard have to support something called IOMMU. Think of it as a traffic controller. It lets your system assign specific hardware to specific VMs without stepping over each other. If you're on Intel, you're looking for something called VT-B. AMD calls it AMD-VI. It's usually under an advanced or chipset menu in your BIOS. You want to make sure to turn that on. Now let's boot into Proxmox and verify it worked. If you see lines mentioning IOMMU or DMAR, you're good. If it comes back empty, your BIOS settings didn't stick, or your hardware doesn't support it. And it's better to know now than 3 steps from now. Quick note on GPUs. Both NVIDIA and AMD support pass-through, but NVIDIA has an extra quirk. It detects when it's running inside a VM and throws an error. We'll handle this later. Just know going in that NVIDIA needs a couple extra settings. On my cluster, I'm running a GTX 3050. If yours is different, drop a comment. I've probably worked with it before and can help you out. All right, this is where we start making changes. I'm going to go step by step and put every command on the screen. First, we'll tell the kernel to turn on IOMMU at boot. Open up your GRUB config. First line starts with GRUB, command line Linux default, and add the Intel or AMD appropriate command. Save that and then run update GRUB. Next, we need to load in some kernel modules to handle pass-through. These are vfio modules. Think of them as the translator between your VM and the physical GPU. Add these 4 lines. This is important. Right now, your Proxmox host might try to use the GPU itself. We need to tell it, hands off, this GPU belongs to the VM. Nano into this file and add these 2 lines. Now we find the GPU PCID, and here is where you find the ID. That's the vendor and device ID. Copy that and create the vfio config. We nano into the file and set the following options. That second ID is the GPU's audio controller. You'll need both. I'll explain why in a minute. Now run this command and reboot your system. Once you're rebooted, we'll run a quick check using this command. If you see vfio PCIe listed in the kernel driver, the GPU is locked and loaded and ready for your VM. Now this next section's key. It's a thing a lot of tutorials gloss over. We have to make sure the IOMMU grouping is correct. Every device on your system belongs to an IOMMU group. When you pass through a device, you have to pass through everything in that group. If your GPU shares a group with, say, a USB controller or a network card, you can't hand over the GPU alone. It'll pass through everything. What we want to see is your GPU and audio device in a group of its own. If you're sharing with other stuff, you have a few options. Move the GPU to a different slot, or look into ACS override patch. I'll link a resource for that in the description. This is the #1 reason why people get stuck. Now you know to check it first. Hardware's prepped, modules are loaded. GPU is reserved. Now let's build a VM that's going to use it. In Proxmox, create a new VM. A few settings matter here. For the BIOS, pick cBIOS. cBIOS has been most reliable for me, but lots of people suggest using QVMF. This is just my experience and what has worked for me. Machine type, set to Q35. This is a more modern chipset emulation and handles PCI pass-through better. For CPU type, make sure to change this to host. The default KVM64 hides the GPU features from the VM. Host mode passes them through, and your GPU drivers will thank you. Now we need to add the GPU. The most important part, go to Hardware, click Add PCIe device. You'll see your GPU listed here, select it, and make sure to check all functions. This passes through both the GPU and its audio controller. Remember those two PCI IDs from earlier? This is why we grabbed both. Click PCI Express and primary GPU if this will be the primary display driver on the VM. If you're on NVIDIA, there's one more thing. NVIDIA's drivers check if you're running a VM, and if they detect a hypervisor, they'll throw a code 43 error. Super helpful, right? We need to hide the hypervisor. Edit your VM config with nano, and then add this line. This tells the VM not to advertise it's running on a hypervisor. The NVIDIA drivers install correctly, and you never see the code 43 error. Now we need to install the drivers. Now boot up your VM, install the OS you want, and then install the appropriate GPU drivers on the VM. Once that's done, run the following command. And there it is. The VM sees the GPU, full CUDA support, full driver access. We're ready to go. So now you've got a VM with a real GPU. Let's put it to work. I'm going to spin up Frigate, an AI-powered camera system, and show you what GPU pass-through actually means in practice. Frigate does real-time object detection on camera feeds. It looks at every frame and decides if there's a person, car, animal, whatever you've configured. Without a GPU, the detection runs on your CPU and it's very slow. With pass-through, the GPU handles the heavy lifting. Check out these numbers. Inference time down to milliseconds, CPU usage on the host, barely noticeable. I'm running 4 cameras like this, all doing real-time detection on a $50 GPU inside of Proxmox. The cloud equivalents to do this would be about $200 a month. The card pays for itself in a couple weeks, and I have a peace of mind with privacy. And it integrates with Home Assistant. So when Frigate spots someone, I get a notification with a snapshot on my phone. If you want a full Frigate setup walkthrough, I did a dedicated video on that, link in the description. I've used this method for clients to be able to pass through a GPU to VMs and give them power when they need it and save them money by not having to have multiple workstations for infrequently used software. The camera AI detection is a great add-on too for an older system that doesn't have AI detection. All right, let me save you some hours. Here are 5 problems that I've hit repeatedly and how to fix them. You boot the VM and get nothing, just a black screen. 9 times out of 10, this is the BIOS type. Go back and make sure you pick the correct one. Also, if you are using OVMF, make sure that you've added the EFI disk. Proxmox doesn't always add this automatically. You've installed the NVIDIA driver, and it says Windows has stopped this device and has reported a problem. This means the driver detected a hypervisor. Go back to section 5 and add the ARCs to the files as suggested. Reboot the VM, reinstall the driver, done. You try to start the VM and Proxmox gives you an error about IOMMU or device assignment. Check your IOMMU groups. The GPU is probably sharing a group with another device. You need to either pass through all the devices or isolate the GPU. This is the one I warned you about earlier. You reboot after configuring everything, and your Proxmox host locks up or loses its display. What happened is the host is trying to use the GPU that you blacklisted. If the GPU was your only display output, the host has nothing to show you. Make sure you either have another GPU for the host, or you're accessing Proxmox through the web UI from a different machine. You don't need a display on the host, but it is nice to have. Everything works, but there's no audio device in the VM. GPUs have their own audio controllers. It's a separate PCIe device that lives on the same IOMMU group. You need to pass through both the GPU and the audio device. If you checked all functions when adding the GPU, this should be done automatically. If not, add the audio device manually. If you hit something I didn't cover, drop it in the comments. I've probably seen it across my 8 nodes, and if I haven't, I'll try to help you out. That's GPU pass-through on Proxmox, the version that includes all the parts that can actually go wrong. IOMMU groups, NVIDIA workarounds, the real problems you run into during one of these setups. If I've saved you time, please subscribe. It takes a second and it helps me keep making these so you don't have to make the same mistakes I do and learn the hard way. Next up, I'm going to look at some management solutions for my 8 nodes. Should be interesting. I'll see you in the next one.